grand matrix, which is geostrategic matrix. So that is where the whole idea of the Indo-Pacific, as both a security construct, as an economic construct, as a cultural construct, becomes important. And mind you, this was ultimately, you forget the last 200 years. This region, when you start talking of the Bay of Bengal, when you start talking of the states of Malacca and the coast of Africa, these were the centers of a globalized world order 500 years ago. And it started and it went on for years and years and years. And today the economic shift which is happening is again turning the attention of the world back to this region of the world. And that is why the Indo-Pacific, yes, is gaining currency. How long it remains in currency depends how long it serves the interests of the people in the region. Otherwise, it gets displaced as a concept and something else takes its place.
Thank you very much. Hideaki, if I can turn to you, we've mentioned some of these constructs, and of course, you don't speak for the Japanese government, I know, but of course, Prime Minister Abe has been one of those who has been particularly vocal in terms of...
I'm glad that it was the Japanese Prime Minister who might have started using the whole concept in the Pacific. And then we are rather surprised to see that we have impacted some of the policymakers, including policymakers in Washington, D.C. Now, United States policymakers draft a national security strategy paper, national defense strategy paper. They all use the concept of Indo-Pacific as a key cornerstone of their strategic way of thinking. And then we are very much glad to see this kind of forum where we discuss Indo-Pacific in South Asia. However, I have heard sometimes that regardless of this kind of historical background, sometimes the manner Japanese diplomats, for instance, talk about Indo-Pacific remains rather vague. It lacks strategic clarity. I would say that we are very much interested, though we are a little bit surprised to see the development of events. We did not necessarily anticipate that this is so much widely circulated. So we will ourselves would like to see how much we would like to really use this concept strategically for our own sake. And we did talk about three things under the heading of the Indo-Pacific, free and open Indo-Pacific. One, rule of law in the sea. Second, economic prosperity. And the third, peace and security. All of these sounds very broad, quite frankly, very vague, though it is clear that we would like to keep rule of law, international order in public sea, because that is a vital interest of Japanese people, for instance. And then we really would like to see peace and security, maintenance of political order in this area, coastal countries facing the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, so that we can communicate, we can develop our connections with these countries. And then we would like to expect that we all have economic prosperity through this channel. So this logic is very simple, but at this moment there is no refined blueprint to how to make it happen, really, or how to develop those ideas. But I would like to say that at least this situation tells the strong desire on the side of Japanese policymakers to be connected with people covering with this, whom we cover with the concept of the free and open Indo-Pacific. 10 years ago, Chinese GDP surpassed Japanese GDP, and now they are far ahead. But 10 years before this historic incident, what Japanese tried to contribute to setting up some kind of institutional frameworks to have common economic prosperity ranging from APEC framework, Asia-Pacific concepts, and so on. And then there are some difficulties in developing organizational framework, furthermore because of security alliance and so on. But at this moment, there's no really fundamental obstacle in cooperating with our immediate neighbors in Northeast Asia. And Southeast Asia, we invited them together with some partners like the United States in the same framework. But now we are saying that India's GDP is going to surpass Japan's in 10 years' time. So now is the time for us to be ready to accept that reality. By connecting Asia-Pacific region to economic development areas in new forms like South Asia, including Bangladesh, and Africa, where we observe the fastest growth of the population. It's still underdeveloped, but enormous potential. So sometimes Japanese policymakers say that free and open Indo-Pacific is not a strategy, it's just a vision. And it is not designed against any particular partners, nations. And it is not even the geographical concept. All of which are true. In the sense that the Asia-Pacific region, that was something like a geographical concept, in the sense that there is something like a Pacific region, something like Asia region, but there is no such a thing as the Indian Oceans region. So we really want to talk about network of people who wants to be connected with each other. It's a little bit vague, but the intent is to be very vague because of this kind of policy intention of being connected to the areas where we see enormous potential.
Thank you. And digging a little bit deeper now, if we may, into some of these constructs and those norms and so forth. Admiral, you spoke to that as well. I mean, from your perspective, both previous career and indeed now working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I mean, what's your observations? We heard earlier about how Bangladesh has managed a couple of its disputes, you know, and what lessons can we draw in those, and where do we think there may be more work to be done?
Thank you. In fact, what my Japanese colleague has said, that vision. Yes, this vision is actually flows from the common international order, you know. Bangladesh definitely respect for sovereignty and independence of its states. We are a smaller country. This morning, our Honorable Prime Minister has clearly stated that we have been able to resolve our maritime boundary issue based on the international laws. So that's the norms. Peaceful resolution of disputes, that's a part. We all say and we all like it. Free, fair, and reciprocal trade, you know, based on the investment, transparency and everything. Those are part of it. But according to international rules and norms, whatever today we have been discussing, if we fall back on the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, 1982, then you will find there are beyond 200 nautical miles of your sea, there is always freedom of navigation. That means all ships, irrespective of the coastal or landlocked country, can navigate with goods or without goods. So there is no problem on that, it's free. And also all aircrafts, whether it belongs to Nepal, or it belongs to Switzerland, or it belongs to Bangladesh, or India, or Japan, they can also fly over the high sea, there is no problem. And along with it, the freedom of fishing is also given. That means beyond 200 miles of your coast, fishing can also be done by any coastal or landlocked countries, which Siola was speaking about, and which is also a part of the blue economy, and people are looking for more fish. And from the fish, the IUU has come in. Although the UNCLOS did not actually deal with the illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing, but now the FAO has got some regulation on the Port State Measures Agreement, and there is other agreement which actually bars the IUU fishing, even in the international waters. And there is also a discussion going on in the WTO about the subsidy being provided to the IUU fishing. The subsidy amounts to about $20 billion. And you know, on the SDG goal 14, this has to be stopped by 2020. I don't know, this is already 2019. By another 1 year's time, how WTO is going to come to terms with all the countries which have got very differing views, because these subsidies are provided by the developed countries. Of course, there are some middle-income countries, they also provide the subsidies, but the subsidies are to go, and they must go by 2020. So that's another important issue which we would be interested to see that, you know, these issues are looked into. We already have this freedom, and those freedoms by any law or by any coastal law cannot be carved or limited right now, till we have a new, of course, law of the sea, which I don't see right at the moment is feasible. But then what we are having now is biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. Another new law which is coming up, that is beyond 350 nautical miles, how the sea is to be governed. So new mechanism is coming. So that will also allow us for even mining and seabed mining and other issues which will be dealt with, including the marine genetic resources, which will actually give you the lot of inputs on making your cosmetics, you know, medicine and other health products. So these are the norms which are being followed or are upcoming in the forefront for now. So what we see that as a concept, yes, it can be pursued. It's a good one because it allows you for domestic and economic development in the right perspective. But however, as I said in the earlier one, there are some issues with the governance and security. If these three issues are lumped together, probably, you know, the new issues will come in. So there has to be some clarity on these issues. Bangladesh, as a, you know, right now we are just moving up to developing country. We would like to follow, of course, take the benefit out of the Indo-Pacific concept, because that will allow us more economic development, and provided we see how this construct is going to help even all other coastal or non-coastal countries in the time to come.
Very good, thank you, thank you. I will come down the panel, and then I want to just check in terms of people who may have questions, because I don't want us to run out of time for the questions. But so coming down the panel, Hideaki, any ideas from you, whether it's the things which you think are really missing or under strain at the moment, or indeed maybe coming soon in terms of new norms or adapted norms that are very important in the years ahead?
I described the picture of the free and open Indo-Pacific by mentioning main three components. East Asia, South Asia, mainly India and Bangladesh, and Africa facing the Indian Ocean. And then actually the government officials regard these three areas as at least potential partners of any kind of economic prosperity for Japan. Although there are three layers: Asians, traditional partners; South Asians, next traditional partners; and Africa, we want to cultivate more intentionally. But if we have this kind of picture, and then now we are discussing the patrol by the coalition of the willing in terms of the Hormuz Strait, Bab el-Al-Shabaab, any other Middle Eastern Arabic region, and then we discuss the Middle Eastern security affairs as well as African security affairs. So we have to accept the reality, and then there are many volatile areas, quite frankly, and there are so many conflicts between states, within states, and then quite frankly, we understand the so-called global war on terror as part of the issues ahead of the picture of the free and open Indo-Pacific. How to overcome the conflict situations in the Middle East and Africa, how to overcome the very structural fundamental issues as regards the peace and security in the age of the war on terror. These are the issues which we find it very difficult to solve. But when we mention peace and security issues in the context of the free and open Indo-Pacific, and then we would have to discuss this very hard issue of peace building, conflict resolution issues as part of a long vision of free and open Indo-Pacific.
Yeah. And Veerle, same question you in a sense, but perhaps what can we draw on from other parts of the world as well in terms of these new norms, or what are the drivers that could be causing some contestation or a need to adapt?
Maybe I can just kind of outline a couple of, just continuing on that thread actually, some norms that I think are either in contestation or will have to require further thought. The first is, of course, that some existing UNCLOS norms are disputed by countries. For example, requiring prior notification, even though it's just innocent passage. That's a challenge to an existing UNCLOS norm. A second one that I think we need to bear in mind is the impact of climate change on UNCLOS and maritime norms. So what will changing maritime boundaries mean for resolutions so far in maritime delineation? Under UNCLOS there is no certainty yet as to how that will be managed. So when borders disappear or when they retreat, what does that mean for existing maritime territory? That's something that needs to be figured out. And then of course, how does new technology also challenge existing maritime norms? So what is the role of, for example, or what are the rules that govern the use of underwater unmanned vehicles? There is no legislation or regulation around this. So those are all issues that I think warrant more attention. And then maybe, how do other countries look around sharing maritime zones? I think there's an interesting case, of course, of the Mediterranean, where countries have voluntarily limited or kept their maritime claims quite limited. They've not claimed EEZs by and large and restricted it to 12 nautical miles territorial sea. And then have implemented maritime protections that I think we can start to have conversations about bringing partners together and countries together to manage what is effectively a shared domain.
Yeah, of which, as you say, in a sense we don't understand it fully yet, because it is huge and it's evolving with things like climate change as well. And I want to come back to the point on partnerships, but Sunjoy, if I may, of course, India more broadly, we talk a lot about India now aspiring to become a country which is shaping the rules, the new rules that we need of the 21st century. I mean, what is your sense of the appetite, the ambition, or where might the government of India be going in terms of those rules as they apply in the maritime domain?
I think India has been very, very clear on how it views this entire domain. Prime Minister Modi himself said that we do not conceive in terms of any secure international arbitration. Both sides agreed. India lost, but it accepted the verdict which came to it, and that is the way things should be functioning. When you start talking about the laws and about sharing resources, sharing fisheries, sharing boundaries of because eventually when you go down to resources like oil and gas or minerals, yes, there are going to be boundary disputes between nations. They will keep on arising, but the way to resolve them is the way through international rules. I think the key lesson to learn is that this entire region is extremely diverse. It's got very, very different kinds of polities. It's got very different kinds of countries. You've got democracies, you've got authoritarian regimes in place. You've got a very diverse set of people, nations residing within nations. So there are all kinds of conflicts which keep on arising because it has got a deep colonial past as well. So those contradictions and conflicts will always exist. But the way out is that this is one region. When it comes down to most of the smaller states and the middle powers, they are going to definitely throw their weight behind multilateralism. They want multilateral institutions to come in, step in, and resolve these issues. That is why rules become important. That is why norms become important. And that is why any hegemon, no matter who that hegemon is not acceptable to anybody in the region, whether it is, whether it is a techno-hegemon, whether there are wars between on what kinds of technical regime should be prevailing, or whether it's an economic hegemon or a hegemon who is trying to lay down a particular security architecture. That is precisely the position that India takes. So multilateralism, multilateral institutions, and the growth of multilateral institutions, which can then accommodate the very different, diverse challenges which exist, which never existed before. When you start talking about climate, that is where there is a severe lack. That is where there are more, this is a world which actually needs more of globalization, not less of globalization.
Thank you. I will come back, if we have time, to partnerships, institutions, multilateral, minilateral, regional, and so forth, because I'd be interested to hear what you think could be the key ones in the next few years. Before we do that, and we have 10 or so minutes, I just wanted to see if we have any questions from the audience. I can see a couple of people moving to the microphone. Please, in the interest of time, one question, and if we can keep it as a question rather than a speech disguised as a question.
Anyway,
there we are. There we are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My question to all, especially here, Admiral Mr. Khurshed. When you say maritime common for all, if it is to the future generation, with my experience, our younger generation doesn't know much about maritime resources or blue economy. How you can develop and inform this younger generation, whole region, so that they can take a lead and reach to the target. And just a substitute question to Japan. I remember 76, I was in Japan. On the invitation of Japan, I was very young, but I took my team 50%. Girls, 3 boys. And I told Japan, being the sun-rising country of the world, why don't you share sun-rising technical hand with the world? Now Bangladesh coming up. I just proud to say, the worker I found in the factory, now he is industrialist in Bangladesh with Tanaka Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Was there anybody else? And we'll take a couple of questions before we go back to the panel. Yes, at the back. Yeah, please. Sorry, it's, yeah.
Not working? No.
Yep, you're on.
So, Chrysalewski from Poland, Boehm Institute. I have a question on trade, because many of goods are traded on the sea, and I wanted, recently, there was a trade agreement called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. I understand signed with the major role of Japan. So that's why it's my question to Professor Shinoda. So Japan is leading many of the trade agreements. It's part of many of the, I think, every major trade agreement within the region has the Japan participation and Japan leadership. So that's my word of congratulation, rather. And to my question really to Sunjoy Joshi is, why is India so hesitant of joining any kind of larger trade organization? Because India is very vocal in principle of free trade, but when it comes to negotiations of free trade agreement with the EU or the RCEP, it's hesitant, and the negotiations between EU and India. It is also 10 years now, and quite recently, India just decided not to participate in the RCEP. So why is it so?
Thank you. Which takes us to the point around regional organizations as well. Do you have a reaction, Sunjoy, on RCEP and India and the recent decision to, at this stage, not to be going forward?
Part of it is a negotiating strategy, where I think as time moves on, India would be joining one or multiple of these trading organizations, for the simple reason that you are headed into a world where you are going to see major reconfiguration of global value chains take place. Global value chains in the next few years are going to look very, very, very different. And most countries in the region today are looking at that reshaping of global value chains, which is either taking place because of, one, trade wars, and the other reason is that you have the fourth industrial revolution coming into existence, which is going to be changing the modes of manufacturing. It's going to be changing how you employ the three traditional ways of land, labor, and capital. The equations are going to change between them. So these kinds of agreements, yes, are definitely going to pave the way as to how countries position themselves over the next few years. India had a very high mounting trade deficit with China, and the trade deficit has gone on increasing. It was close to $60 billion. The major differences which existed between India and China as far as RCEP was concerned was primarily about the number of concessions that India was willing to give, whether it should be 70% or 90%. So there are, I think, negotiations going on, and most of the RCEP members also understand that if India is not part of the RCEP, RCEP loses 1/3 of its weight, heft, and might. So there are countries keen negotiating with India. I think this is a process of negotiation which is going to go on. This is not the end of the matter. Similarly, whether there are trade agreements with the EU, yes, there are problems on the Indian side, and there are core hard problems. So negotiations are going to be hard, but to say that India is not going to be entering these trade pacts is wrong. India does understand which way the future of trade is going to work. India is ultimately, in its ambitions, as far as trade goes, in favor of globalization, in favor of more trade rather than less trade. It is not protectionist.
Thank you. And so another question. Yes, please, sir.
Hello. Sorry, Mahfouz Sadiq. I used to be the correspondent for BBC here, but now they changed me to a news desk in London. But I just wanted to ask, obviously Maritime Commons for all this, it was a lot of discussion about cooperation, but in terms of flashpoints, I'm quite curious. I mean, the common cliche of the South China Sea and the next war will be there. But is there another example somewhere in the Indo-Pacific sort of realm where you, I don't know who would like to respond, that you see a potential flashpoint that could essentially lead to breakdown of some of this? I mean, in Bangladesh, I read about, you buy a submarine from China and India gets really angry about it, and the string of pearls theory. So where might be the next flashpoint, other than the South China Sea, which is too cliched in a sense?
Thank you very much. I mean, well, there are certainly a lot of disputes, so we can say that. So who would like to take, everyone looks to everyone else, but Admiral, would you like to?
I had a question already, blue economy, somebody has asked. So let me answer that first.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for asking that question. Yes, blue economy is nothing but use of the resources of the sea. But unfortunately, as you know, in Bangladesh, we have studied in our social study book is that Bangladesh is a riverine country. So our vision is stopped at the mouth of the river. It didn't go to sea. So the total rivers in the country, if you area-wise calculate, it is about 15,000 square kilometers. Whereas at sea, we have more than 100,000. So we could have been a, Samudra-Matrik country as well, but we are not. In our history book, there is nothing much written. In our literature also, there is nothing written, like mermaid or something, So people get interested about the sea. We visit sea during the honeymoon time. Let me tell you on a lighter vein, that in honeymoon, you need to see each other more than the sea itself. So you take bath in knee-deep water and come back, and that's your vision for the sea. And that's how, till today, after 5 years of what our Honorable Prime Minister has done for us, we are still restricted to fishing within 50 kilometers from our coastline. There is no deep sea fishing. We are paying $5 billion every year for our $80 billion trade, export-import to be carried by 3,000 foreign ships because we don't have ships. So that means awareness is a must for us to get the benefit of the blue economy. And I would expect that today's media should also highlight this, because media only highlights the issues which are not a good one, like prospective blue economy issues could be also highlighted by the media as well for taking us in future. Well, about the second question about the Flashpoint, yes, there had been a lot of writings, I'm sure Sunjoy will answer this question, but so far, I think the international rules have prevailed upon all the countries, but we are not very sure yet what is the status of Quad takes place. The Quad is, is America, India, Australia, South Korea, the 4 countries. If it takes a defense shape, defense construct in the future, it's very difficult to say how things will look like. But right at the moment, I can say, as looking into the developments in the maritime arena, yes, there are over 400 ships being built in Southeast Asia and South Asia, naval ships, I mean, not the merchant ships. So there are, issues could be taken up, but I don't see as a flashpoint anywhere, so long the trade and commerce is allowed to flow as it is enshrined in the UNCLOS.
Thank you very much. And a final word, if may, the session tomorrow on the blue economy as well, which I commend people to as well. Final words in terms of, if you like, the flashpoints, but also, as I mentioned, the partnership or the institutions you think will be critical in the next couple of years. Hideaki.
Maybe trying to connect my last remarks with some of the elements.
And we will have to be
questions.
brief, I'm afraid,
Yeah,
so people
okay.
can,
there are some critical issues. It's not an intentional move, but we find that after the end of the Cold War, after the meaning of the kind of a capitalist camp lost its own political meaning. And then we developed the Asia-Pacific framework, Indo-Pacific framework to discuss the free trade area or the kind of extending the network of like-minded states to share economic prosperity. But now we feel that talking about these issues in this manner, sometimes we feel that we are discussing almost like a very much classical geopolitical theory. Because Japan once again restored the identity of an island country. And maritime issues are regarded as a really important issue for an island country. And from the perspective of theory of geopolitics, there are some issues, but one significant issue is the critical importance of a peninsula. The Korean Peninsula, Indochina Peninsula, and the Indian continent, and the Arabic Peninsula in terms of the Hormuz Strait, Bab el-Mandeb. China, United States, and Japan have military bases in Djibouti, in the Horn of Africa. Looking at the volatility in the Middle East as well as conflict issues or peace operations, peace-building issues in Africa. Perhaps having this kind of natural observations in mind and then trying to develop new initiatives in the 21st century, perhaps we would like to tackle new agendas like peace building together with partners in the network of free and open in the Pacific, like going to Africa together with the Bangladesh partner to build up consolidated peace in African countries. And then perhaps we will be able to establish a friendship with key partners in this initiative like Bangladesh. That's our vision, perhaps.
Thank you very much. And Veerle, Sunjoy, final thoughts, if I may. Always an unfair question to sum up so quickly, but in terms of where the international community or regional players should be putting their efforts in the next few years, what would you pick out?
I mean, other than what's already been said, which were very good points, I think for me, one thing that I feel we need to come back to time and again is really de-escalation methods and crisis management mechanisms. I think with, just the comment now about the number of ships that are being built, naval ships, the the importance of the Maritime Commons for all of us and the kind of resorting naval strategies that accompany that from countries, I think necessitates continued dialogue and communication. And when and if there is any sort of, misunderstanding or tension at sea, we really do need to have the mechanisms in place to be able to de-escalate that quite quickly. But in addition to that aspect of things, I think working together on finding collaborative solutions, and this pertains to the question of blue economy as well, not just between governments, but really whole of society initiatives that include private sector solutions to working with fishing companies, making sure that environmental protection and regulations are being adhered to, together with local NGOs, coastal NGOs. I think those are all ways in which we can bring everyone together, and in that role, the media is key as well.
Sunjoy, if I may.
I'd like to end on an optimistic note. It's very good to say there are lots of flashpoints around in the region, and any time conflict would break out. But start looking at the areas where, yes, there has been very solid cooperation. Disaster management. In disaster management, all countries have got together, stepped in, no matter who they are, and come and help each other out. Similarly, anti-piracy measures. In anti-piracy also, there has been a lot of cooperation along the entire Indian Ocean rim. It's happened between China, India, it's been between countries who otherwise think in terms of balancing each other out in the larger security architecture. So there is, it is not that all is doom and gloom. There are things happening. The worrying thing in the last few years has been, that there has been a breakdown of the transatlantic consensus. And that has become a cause for worry for people in the region. And that is where the power of multilateral institutions to keep the peace, the power of multilateral institutions to maintain harmony, or really write down norms which will be acceptable becomes questionable. So the future, as I see, is if things go on the way it is, there will need to be far more conversations taking place, plurilateral conversations taking place between diverse powers in the region and outside the region to start creating norms and start creating different kinds of coalitions which are going to take this way forward. And I think that is going to be ultimately for the next few years until multilateralism reestablishes itself as a larger consensus. That is where we are headed.
You have very wonderfully concluded and opened up a whole bigger debate as well, but thank you very much. I will pass over to Nubi, who must now make sure we are finishing and going on to our next thing. But if everyone could join me in thanking our panel very much for the discussion.
Thank you, distinguished guests, our panelists, moderator, for the very insightful discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin the last session of the first day of the Dhaka Global Dialogue. Professor Shams Rahman, School of Business, IT and Logistics, RMIT University, Melbourne, shall deliver a speed talk on connecting the Asia-Pacific sustainable supply chains. But before that, one important housekeeping announcement. For dinner today, please reach the main hotel lobby entrance by 7:30 hours. Buses will be leaving at 7:30 hours sharp. I repeat, for tonight's dinner, buses will be leaving at 7:30 hours sharp. May I now request Professor Shams Rahman to please take over. Thank you.